There's lots of secret changes and new features added in Elden Ring's latest update. We're gonna check all of that in this video and if any of these are worth it. Now, some of the quest lines, as we've talked about in other videos, have been continued or, well, made complete pretty much. We will see how these affect your playthroughs, and of course, we're gonna take a look at some of the other items that were added or buffed in the latest update 1.3, so let's begin. Let's begin with a few item changes that are affecting the early game, and of course, we have a new summon for the first part of the game called the Banished Knight Angval. I think I pronounced that wrong, but just roll with it. Basically, this is a new reward from the Duelist mini-boss in the Murkwater Catacombs, and it's now replacing the Battle Hammer that would normally drop from this boss in the previous patches with this new summon. Now, the summon is actually pretty great, actually, way better than the starting wolves. It's definitely one of the best early on in terms of summons, having a ton of leaps, AoE damage, quite a bit of range, and it's also very aggressive, so it can definitely pull that aggro. Unfortunately though, it also replaces one of my favorite starting weapons, which is the Battle Hammer. This was amazing early on because of the battle cry that would give you some nice defenses and offenses, and because of the heavy attack on it, which would just demolish enemies. Now, I'm not exactly sure if this was fully intended, but you can find the same Battle Hammer now much later in the game at one of these other Duelist mini-bosses around the Colosseum area in Lindell, the main capital, so you kind of have to progress a bit more in the game. It's also not guaranteed, so you have to farm for it a little bit, which means it's, yeah, pretty much gone down the drain, no longer worth it by the time you reach that point. Now, speaking of some other changes, let's also look at the Roundtable Hold and some of the vendors in the game. Specifically, the Twinned Husks vendors right here had a massive reduction in price to the smithing stones, about 3 to 4 times. Specifically, taking a look at a smithing stone 8, previously it would cost 12,000 runes to even buy one of these, while in the new update that only costs, well, in this case, 3,600, which I think is a pretty good reduction in price. I think you're gonna be able to just upgrade normal gear and weapons way easier this way. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the somber smithing stones, which retain the same prices as before. Now, speaking of vendors, there's actually a number of vendors around the map, especially early on, that now do sell more smithing stones. They did not have these previously, and this could help you if you start a new character and want some extras if you also have the runes. So specifically going a few of these, you also have the Isolated Merchant here in the Weeping Peninsula, also the Nomadic Merchant right here at the Coastal Cave sells some, and there's one by the Liurnia Lake shore that I found to also sell even more smithing stones of higher quality, and there's likely a handful of more other NPC vendors around the starting parts of the map that continue to now sell new smithing stones compared to some of the previous patches. Oh, and before I forget, there's also a small change to Enya's shop, so now she doesn't say purchase anymore to the second section. Instead, it mentions receive equipment, so a little bit different to better reflect the reality. Now, let's move over to some of the other stuff you can get in the game. Of course, as I've said, a lot of the buffs, especially bloodlust ones, have been buffed in this new update, and of course Mariah's Executioner's Sword is one of them that I just tested, and my god, it's actually amazing. So the weapon art on this one lets you perform a similar boss move as the boss you got it from, as in you just throw it and it starts perforating things like it's some kind of drill. I call it rip you a new one because I think it's appropriate. Now, it's highly unlikely to like completely change the meta. It's more of a situational item that can totally take people or enemies by surprise. It's also fun to play around with, at least in my opinion, and having a different sort of functionality to your build can definitely change things around a little bit and make things a bit more interesting. Now, also speaking of other weapons, a couple of staves have been majorly buffed in the new update, or at least fixed. They were just broken previously and barely did any damage. One of them is the Rotten Staff, which you acquire from one of these earth trees that are patrolling the Elfiel region right here, one of these walls. You can simply make your way over there, jumping over these platforms, reaching down, and then you can just defeat the boss and get one of these Rotten Staffs, though I did hear some people could get 2 of them. What you're looking for here is the special attack on it, which is this jump up and landing with a huge explosion, similar to what the same mini boss was doing against you. And this has been now fixed so that it deals over 1000 1000 damage with nothing really invested into it, with the exception of having the minimum requirements, which are quite high for the strength, so 34 points into that. But outside of that, you can deal straight up 1000 damage easily without doing anything else on top. And it's also quite fun. You get a ton of poise, or at least you aren't getting interrupted that easily during that jump animation. I've tested this in multiple combat encounters and barely anything would even, well, stop me. There's also a second staff similar to this called the Staff of Avatar that you get from a different boss, and of course in this case this one is actually way better. It has a better strength scaling, it also scales up and requires faith, so this is more appropriate for anybody who's using holy damage and wants to buff holy damage with a lot more faith. And the explosion on it also has a much better, well, damage. You can jump in for 2k in this case if you go point blank, and it's also quite funny to throw enemies off their feet and follow up maybe with a critical hit. It definitely happens often. You can also dual wield them. They are definitely powerful, reaching high damage on the physicals, but I really like that explosion, and maybe you might find it worth it now that they have been fixed in the new update. But we talked about the shaded castle where you could get that really cool sword that was drilling things. Well, at the same shaded castle, assuming that you have progressed in Patch's questline, you can now finally finish it. So Patches previously would be found in the Murkwater Cave, then he would eventually move to the Scenic Island, eventually to that Volcano Manor, and you would also do a contract for him. And once you were done with the contract and finished the Volcano Manor, he would then finally move to the Shaded Castle. And now he actually completes his storyline, sort of. He's now gonna be able to talk to you during these sequences, and he gives you a new item called the Dancer's Castanets, I think. I don't know, dude, but eventually you can bring these back at the lady from the Volcano Manor, assuming that you defeated the final boss over there, which is, well, Rykard in this case. You can actually give it to her, but she doesn't do anything after this point, so I'm pretty sure that this is reserved for some kind of future update, or maybe DLC, or maybe it's just bugged again. I'm not really sure. I tried everything after giving that to her, and she doesn't really do anything, but what I know is that Patches did leave that, that shaded castle too eventually, so who knows where he might pop up next. In terms of some of the other secret changes and other resolutions to some of the quest lines in the game, the one for Nepheli actually did reach its conclusion, at least for now. Now, if you finished her quest line until you defeated that mini boss at the town of Albinorix and also defeated Godric, you would make your way to the Roundtable Hold, and now she is one level down these stairs below the blacksmith where, yeah, that conversation would have ended. Well, in the new update you can bring her a new item so she can continue that questline and you can finally finish it for her reward. And that will bring you to the Chapel of Anticipation. To reach that place you will need to first follow up to this area called the Four Belfries, take the stone and then use it to activate the portal nearby and make your way to the chapel. Defeat the boss that kicked your butt at the early parts of the game, and then simply go back to the area where you spawned when you started the game and just go up this rooftop to get the Stormhawk King. And also make sure you get the Stormhawk summon from the nearby chest. With those two items in your possession, you can go and make your way back at Nepheli, give it to her, and this is going to progress you to the final stage of her side quest. But before you can fully complete that, you need a couple of things. One of them is to first make sure that you completed the side quest for Kenneth until you liberated Fort Height, and he is the lord of that fort, which doesn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes. And second of all, make sure you have defeated Margot, at least that's one of the main requirements. From this point on, you can simply make back at Godric's castle, back to his throne room, and you will notice that she as well as Kenneth are now here, including a stock which is now in the back. And once you talk to her, she's gonna give you a reward, which is the Ancient Dragon Smithing Stone, another useful one if you want to like upgrade one of your weapons, and more important, you can also buy another one from gas stock, which is in the back behind the throne room. Of course, if for some reason neither of these spawn for you, simply stay at the nearby side of Grace, and you should even like see gas stock just despawning and all of the NPCs appearing back in the throne room. And finally, this brings us to Bairne, which is kind of like this new NPC and also the continuation to Alexander's and Diallo's quest line. Essentially, you find him nearby that study hall just south of it in this, well, Jarburg city town sort of thing. You have to descend using these platforms and eventually reach page right here. Before you do all of this, also make sure that you have progressed and finished Alexander's main quest line, which is quite lengthy and brings you all the way to Crumbling Azula, and also make sure that you completed Diallo's quest line all the way until that Volcano Manor and up until the point where he even leaves the Volcano Manor. Because if you come into this area and become the Potentate, which you do by just talking to Bairne, he will also tell you about nearby Diallos, which you can find in this room right here. From this point on, if you just reload the area by going to the nearby side of Grace, advancing the time and even teleporting back, you're going to follow up the next dialogue up until Bairne will tell you if you know anything about Alexander, point at which if you did finish his quest line you can give his insights, which will finally progress you to the part where he gives you this, well, kind of like talisman that buffs jar throwables. Yes, disappointing, I know, I kind of wanted a better conclusion, but this is how it is. If you reload the area just a couple of times, you should notice the talisman being in the place where he stood before, but now he will be gone. But not fully gone, because in the same area you can find Diallos, and he's gonna be located here in this shack in the back of the town. Once you talk to him and exhausted the dialogue, just go back and reload the areas again using the Side of Grace, and once you're back you should see the town pretty much destroyed and, well, Diallos pathetically being in the middle. Talk to him, choose the dialogue option where he protected the jar kids, and yeah, just do all of that. And also make sure that you talk to the nearby Bairne, who's also at the same location. So if you do all of that and then reload the area a couple of times, you can come back to it and you're going to get his mask and a second flail for that Haslow armor set, which now looks even better because you have the better looking version of that really cool helmet. In my opinion, one of the coolest armor sets in the game, which is now even better. Of course, these aren't new, you could also get it by just like killing Diallos as early as Liurnia, but at least you get a better conclusion for his pathetic existence. This is it though. Let me know down below if there's anything else you noticed in the new update that hasn't been documented in the patch notes, and I'll see you guys in the next video.